Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. One of the 40 traditional meditations as listed in the Visuddhimagga is Devanusati, Contemplation of the Devas. It's not something that is much considered by modern people, at least in the West, but it was obviously considered important to Buddhaghosa, compiler of the Visuddhimagga, and his contemporaries as an integral part of the practice to contemplate the devas. And the way it's explained in that text is as the glory and beauty and happiness of the devas is a reflection and a result of their virtue as human beings, that they had made such virtuous karma. This is the reward of virtue. So it has this this aim, this function is to encourage the practice of virtue, that virtue is in itself beautiful and giving of happiness and ease, and it unfolds into karmic result of happiness, light, enjoyment, glory, those qualities of devas. So what exactly do we mean by devas? Who are the devas? What are they? It seems to be a pretty common feature of religious traditions and spiritual belief systems all over the world to speak about higher classes of beings than human beings. That there are entities or beings that are more refined, more subtle, longer lived, more glorious than here at the human level. In ancient India, these were the devas. It's a concept that predates Buddhism, although the Buddhist system gives it its own flourish, its own peculiar interpretation of the planes of existence and the qualities of the devas. The word deva, the derivation of it is somewhat disputed. It can either mean light, as in brilliant light, or it can be from a root meaning to play or to enjoy. So it has aspects of both in the quality of a deva existence. There are different grades and categories of devas. The lowest category are the Bhuma devas, the earthbound devas. These are devas that live in forests and lonely places, often associated with trees. And this we find also in all over the world, the idea of kind of pixies or fairies or little people living some kind of magical existence in nature. The Bhuma Devas are generally benevolent, or they can be mischievous, and it's not a very exalted or refined form of existence. There are also devas that are said to live in the atmosphere, in the sky, the Walaka devas, that have a role in governing the weather. And it's said there are various kind of categories of these. There are rain devas and snow devas and wind devas. And they each delight in their own kind of play. You know, when they play, it rains or snows or the wind blows. And it's also said that there's this is also ties into the idea of virtue, that if human beings are generally virtuous on the earth, then the devas are pleased and they keep to their proper schedule and they reign in due season. But if human beings are immoral, then this disturbs the devas and they fall out of their regular patterns, and you get either droughts or floods. Like it rains in the wrong time, or it doesn't rain at all. So this is something we find in various ways throughout this system, is that there's an interplay between the morality of humans and the goings on in the higher realms. That all these realms interplay with each other and affect each other. Beyond these kinds of devas, there are devas that dwell in the various heavenly worlds, and there are given to be 6 of these, 6 sensual heavens, the heavens of the devas, the sagas. 2 of them are the 2 lowest of them, exist on the mountain, the central world mountain, Mount Sinnaru, and the lowest one is the heaven of the 4 great kings, Chatu Maharajika, 4 great kings. These are guardians of the world. Each one rules one of the quarters, east, north, south, and west. This mythology of 4 great kings is a theme that was very much taken up in the iconography of Chinese Buddhism. You'll see in East Asian temples, you'll often see statues, 4 statues in 4 corners, with the a figure posed in some kind of like a martial arts fighting pose with a sword, and he's got flowing robes and a ferocious looking beard. And these are the 4 great kings, the guardians, Lokapala. As far as the ancient Indian conception goes, each one has some responsibility for one of the 4 directions, and they guard over, they watch over the human realm. And they're said to send out a chariot with one of their minions on the moon days to patrol the earth and to see if human beings are being moral, keeping the precepts. And they report back. And they also stand guard and watch against the uprisings of the Asuras. These are ferocious demigods or titans that dwell at the bottom of Mount Sinnaru under the ocean. And they come rising up, swarming up the mountain to attack, to try and take over the realms of the gods periodically. And the four great kings are the first line of defense. And this is another interplay with the human realm, because it's said that when human beings keep good morality, when they die, they get reborn into the heaven realm. So the numbers of the host of the army of the heavenly gods increases. But if they're immoral, they get reborn into the Asura realm, and the realms of the Asuras increase. I've wondered about the four great kings. It's very possible that the kings on the playing cards derive from that mythology, because the playing cards are ultimately of Indian origin. It may be that it's meant to represent the four great kings, the division into four suits. Oh. But that's a speculation. But this mythology is very deeply rooted, and it shows up in many ways. This conflict between the gods and the Asuras, the Devas and the Asuras, is found in many other mythologies as well, like the Greek mythology. The gods had wars with the Titans, and in Norse mythology it was the gods of Asgard versus the snow giants, storm giants. So the idea of an ancient battle, primordial battle between two classes of gods, is a very deeply rooted one. The gods that dwell in the in this heaven enjoy a very long lifespan, and they enjoy sensual pleasures well beyond the human. And they dwell in vimanas, which are mansions, but they're also chariots. They're mobile. They can fly around in their vimanas. And there's a curious detail about this particular class of the heavens, the lowest of the heavens, is that there's a couple of additional ways that Devas are said to be able to die there before their time is up. And one of them is they die from heedlessness, which means that they get engrossed in their sensual pleasures to such a degree that they forget to eat. And their constitutions are so subtle, their bodies are so subtle, vibrating at a high level, that if they miss a single meal, they die and they disappear from that realm. Another way they can die is through anger. If it sometimes happens that one Deva is jealous of another Deva, he has a better chariot, or more dancing girls, or finer robes, or whatever, he can be consumed with rage and anger at the disparity, and it can cause them to disappear, because again their constitutions are so subtle, they can't take those kind of strong negative emotions. It totally disrupts their being. So this heaven of the four great kings we see as the very lowest tier of heaven. It still has its issues, right? It's not at the most refined level. The next level is at the top of the mountain, the peak of Mount Sineru, so the very summit of terrestrial existence. At the top of this enormous world mountain is the heaven of the 33, the Tawatingsa heaven, 33 supreme gods that rule this heaven. It's a council of 33 presided over by Saka, the king of the gods. And this particular heaven is spoken of more copiously in the texts than any other. It's very very many stories and descriptions about this heaven. There's a whole book, the Womenawatu, which is the Tales of the Mansions, which talks about these gods, again, as a morality lesson, because the theme of these stories are all very similar, is that Moggallana is visiting the Tawatingsa heaven, and he's meeting and speaking to the Devas, and he sees they live in some glorious mansion, and this mansion might have some peculiar feature, like being decorated with lotuses, and he'll interview the Deva. How did you come to enjoy this great bliss? And the Deva will say, when I was a human being, I gave a handful of lotus flowers to Pacheka Buddha. And as a result of this meritorious act, I've been reborn here in this lotus palace. These palaces or vimanas are created by, is said, by Kama, by the force of Kama. And the being on the earth, a human being who does virtuous deeds, they're building their vimana in the Tawatingsa heaven. And it's ready, it's built. By the time they die, their Kama has already built this heaven, and it's waiting for them. And they appear in the palace. So these gods are not, they don't go through birth and childhood like we do. They just appear fully formed as young adults ready to go in this realm. And all the male Devas have the appearance of perpetually, for their entire lifespan, which is millions of human years, they have an appearance of a 25-year-old. And all the female Devas have the appearance of a 16-year-old, which was probably a reflection of Indian standards of beauty, physical perfection. They enjoy all the sensual pleasures that humans experience, but at a more refined and subtle, more elegant level. So food, music, sex, entertainment, beautiful clothing, furnishings. They live. They're said to be a type or a perfection of sensual enjoyment. These gods, and they generally remember their previous existence as humans, because their birth process is not traumatic like it is for a human being. So their memory isn't wiped clean through the death and birth. They remember their previous life, so they can draw lessons from it. They live a very, very long time, and when they die, they don't suffer the pains of sickness and old age. As they are born, they appear. When they die, they disappear. They're said to get 5 warning signs before they die, shortly as they come close to the end of their lifespan. Their garlands fade, their clothing grows wrinkled, their armpits sweat, their radiance fades, and they grow restless on their seat. This is the sum total of their sufferings of old age. Well, my garments are wrinkly and my armpits are sweaty. I guess I'm getting near the end. That's the end. Then they just disappear. There's one very charming story about some of these Devas. They were playing in the Nandana Grove, the pleasure garden, and sporting and enjoying themselves. And one of the female Devas died. Her time ran out and she died. She just disappeared. And she was reborn as a human being, but she had the gift of remembering her past life. And she remembered she'd been a Deva in this grove. And her whole ambition, her whole life was to get back there. So she spent her whole life doing meritorious deeds and making gifts and keeping the Uposatha vows and always praying, may I be reborn in the Nandana Grove. And she lived to be 100 years old. And a very old lady, she died and was immediately reborn in the Nandana Grove. And the other Devas had hardly missed her. Oh, we haven't seen you for the last little bit. Where were you? The sense of time there is quite different. Yeah? Then when she told the whole story to the chief Dewa of that group, he was appalled and terrified by the idea that human life is so short, and he said, human life is so short, and yet they waste it. And the rulers of that realm are the 33 gods, and we don't have anywhere a list of the 33. There's no comprehensive list of the 33, but the chief of them is Saka, king of the gods, and he was derived from the older pre-Buddhist Vedic pantheon, the god Indra, who is the war god or the thunder god, who would smite beings with his thunderbolt. And there's still some sign of that in Saka, although he's much more gentle in his behavior than Indra. He's been turned into a Buddhist deity. For example, one of the epithets or titles of Indra is a long Sanskrit phrase that means something like the great, terrible destroyer of cities. And there's a Pali title of Saka that looks like it's derived from that because some syllables have been changed, so the meaning has been changed to the great, glorious giver of gifts. So Saka was the king of these gods. And I would say that this particular level of the cosmos is the equivalent of the pantheon of gods in most of the Indo-European or Aryan mythologies, like the Greeks or the Norse. This is the level. So Saka or Indra is Zeus or Thor. This is the equivalencies. But this realm is still, it's not the highest, and it still has some contact with the earth because it's on the top of Mount Sinaru. And they still are troubled by the wars with the Asuras, who sometimes reach as far as their gates of their citadel. The remaining heavens, the 4 remaining heavens or sagas, are not situated on the earth but are above the earth in space, completely separate. So the first one of these is Yama, the heaven of Yama, the Yama gods, the contented or peaceful ones, because they're the first level of existence is not troubled by conflict. They're separated from the wars, so they don't have any part in that. There's actually not much written or said about this particular level beyond that. The next level beyond that is the Tusita heaven, which is special in that it is the realm in which the Bodhisattva spends his last existence. So the Buddha, before he's enlightened, is called the Bodhisattva, and he spends many hundreds of lifetimes practicing the Bodhisattva path, perfecting all the paramis. And when all the paramis are perfected, that's all these spiritual virtues or powers, then he's completed his career, his Bodhisattva career. He's reborn into the Tusita heaven. And this is sort of like a resting place or a long sabbatical before he takes up his Buddha career. And he spends many many lifetimes of humans, like millions of years, dwelling in this glorious heavenly existence. And then the time comes to be reborn as a human. The other devas approach him and they say, "Now is the time, sir, now is the time to take a human birth." And he examines with his mind to see if the time is ripe, if all the conditions are in place on earth for the appearance of a Buddha. And if so, then he falls, he dies from that existence and is reborn as a human babe on earth and begins, to become the Buddha. So at this moment in time, the next Buddha, Maitreya, is dwelling in Tusita heaven, waiting for his turn. There is a story about a pious lay Buddhist who was dying. He was lying in his deathbed and is surrounded by his family. And they brought the monks in to chant for him. And after the monks were chanting a bit, he said, "Not now, not now, go away." And the monks took offense. They thought he was talking to them, and they packed up their stuff and left. And his family asked him, "Why did you drive the monks away?" And he said, "Oh, I wasn't trying to drive them away. I'm sorry, they misunderstood. It's these devas. I wanted them to wait until the monks were finished." And they said, "What devas?" He says, "Oh, I can see the 6 deva chariots in the sky above me here." No one else could see them, but there were a chariot had been sent from each of the deva heavens, asking him to come to our heaven. And he asked his daughter, who was more knowledgeable than him, he asked her, "My dear, they're asking me to go to their heavens. Which one should I choose?" And she said, "Choose Tusita heaven, because then you'll be able to see the Maitreya Buddha." So he asked them to give him a garland of flowers, and he tossed the garland of flowers over the yoke of the chariot from Tusita heaven. And everyone else in the room could see the flowers just like hanging in space. They couldn't see the chariot. And then he died at that instant and was carried off to Tusita heaven. So it's often in Asia, lay Buddhists will have that desire to be reborn in Tusita heaven. Then the remaining two, the highest of the heavens, the 5 and 6, are special in their own way. The 5th heaven is Nimanarati heaven, is the heaven of those who delight in creation. And this is a very peculiar level of beings, that they have a higher degree of karma, of good karma, than the lower heavens. So they have actual control over manifest existence. And whatever they wish with their minds, they create. So they manifest as a reality in their realm whatever they visualize. And so they delight in creation. Now this, I think, tells us something about, this is another point of contemplation to think about, is the relationship of the real and the imagined, and what is real. The question of what is real often comes up. And it's a naive question: are these realms real? The counter question is this human realm real? And in what sense? What do you mean by real? And there's a very complex interplay between so-called manifest reality and perception. And in this human level of existence, we have very limited flexibility in that regard. In the heaven realms, they have more so. And in the heaven of the devas who delight in creation, they have complete control of their manifest reality with their minds. But there's still one more sensual heaven, and that's the Vasawati realm, which is the realm of the beings who delight in the creation of others. they're the overlords, and they don't even bother to create things with their minds. The Niminarati Devas create for them. And they don't even have to specify it because the Niminarati Devas take care of them and just create. And it said it's like the cook for the king. He doesn't have to ask the king every day, what do you want for dinner? He knows from long experience what kind of dishes please the king, and he serves them as such. So this is another statement about the nature of sensual pleasure and the ultimate futility of it. That when you get to the very peak of sensual existence, that beings are always lower than that. They're always striving for more sensual pleasures. It's in that nature of beings in the sensual desire realm. You get to the very peak of this realm, and it's just a completely useless supine existence where you're just sort of spoon-fed delightful images and objects, and there's nothing to do. There's no point to it. So of these 6 heavenly realms of increasingly refined existence, there are similarities between them, where each realm is said to have a Nandana grove at its center, for example. So they're like, in a way, copies of each other, each one more refined, more subtle, more delightful. And the sensual pleasures become gradually more refined, and this is in all types and terms of sensual pleasures. The one example that's explicitly given is sexuality, that goes through these 6 realms. In the lower 2 realms, the ones that are still in contact with the earth, the male and female deities couple similar to humans, except that the male does not emit any fluid, and the acts can last a very long time. But then in the Yama heaven, there's no longer, these male and female still come together, but there's no longer any penetration. They merely embrace. Then in the heaven above that, to Sita heaven, they hold hands and smile and gaze in each other's eyes, bliss out. Yeah. Then in the 5th heaven, they just smile and gaze at each other without touching at all. And in the last heaven, they merely gaze without even smiling. And that's the only explicit example given, but I think you'd probably extrapolate and say that other pleasures like food and so on become gradually more refined. In the Tawatingsa heaven, the food is said to be Sudha Bhojana, pure food. It's like ambrosia, is a word from Western mythology. This kind of amazing food, and we're not really clear what it's like, except that it seems to be a liquid because it's spoken of being served in goblets. And I think this is another lesson we can draw from contemplating the heavenly realms, the sensual heaven realms, is the what I might say, the etherealization or subtilization of sense experience and sense pleasure. We tend to see things, if we don't think about it, we tend to see things in a black and white, yes or no sort of binary. But actually, the whole spectrum of experience is more subtle than that. And one example is music. It's a good example because music is a sensual pleasure. It's a sense experience, and that can exist on many different planes and levels of subtlety, from very coarse kind of heavy metal or something like that, up through jazz and classical and Baroque music and Gregorian chants, gradually, subtilization of the experience. But it's all within the realm of sensuality. These heavens, these six heavens, are not the summit of the cosmos. There's then higher realms than this, which are the Brahma worlds, which are beyond sensuality. And you can imagine ascending through these various realms, and the sense experience becomes more and more subtle, more and more refined, until you make a quantum leap and there's no more sense experience. In the Brahma realms, they don't eat in any sense we would relate to. They feed on bliss, internally generated bliss. They don't have any sexuality. There's no division between male and female. They're all just reckoned beings. They have no interest in any kind of sensuality at all. So there's a limit to sensuality. It can only go so far. And as pleasant and long-lasting and glorious as an existence as a Deva is, it's limited in that it becomes more difficult for those beings to attain liberation from samsara. That the human existence is actually the optimal condition for that. Because in the human realm we have a mixture of pleasure and pain. So we have enough ease that in general, some human beings have more, some have less, but in general human beings have enough ease that there's some room to practice the Dhamma. But they have enough suffering, enough pain in their lives to know there's some problem with samsara, so they have some motivation. The Devas don't have that motivation. Although there's some, it's not impossible. There are some few Devas that do manage to attain states of liberation. They're few and far between. It's more difficult for them. It's said when the Buddha sometimes would go and preach in the heaven realms, many of the Devas would become terrified. They didn't want to hear the teaching because they didn't want to hear that they're impermanent. Their lives are so long they never contemplate the ending of their life, and then they hear that, oh, we too shall perish from here, and then they become terrified. It's also said that one of the advantages of memorizing chanting is that it can come back to you if you're reborn as a Deva, and you can have some Dhamma in your mind to come into your mind. Buddhaghosa said that all the Deva realms speak Pali as their natural language, which is actually highly unlikely. There's a bit of, I mean, if you want to make a case for any language, you could maybe make a case for Sanskrit, but Pali was later than Sanskrit, so I don't see how it could be the language of the Devas. But this was their belief that everyone just naturally spoke Pali in the Deva realms. So if you memorize your chanting, it'll come back to you in the Deva realms. And the way for rebirth into the Deva realms is the minimum requirements are, keeping the precepts and doing acts of generosity. To be reborn into the Brahma realms, the requirement is to have some mastery of jhana. But even the Brahma realms are not ultimate liberation. All these realms are impermanent and imperfect. They're all samsara. And the real goal is to make an end, to be done with any form of rebirth. And that's by realizing the unconditioned.
Handamayam Dhammakataya Sadhu Jaram Dharamase
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.